Hello and welcome to today's ESPC community webinar. Today I am joined by John White, who will answer all your burning questions on all things Microsoft Fabric. So we have John in the hot seat today to answer all your questions. So please do pop any questions that you have into the Q&A box and John will gladly answer them for you. So as always, we love hearing what you guys have to say. So remember to join in on the conversation about today's webinar and more on X. Our handle is at ESPC_community and our hashtag is hashtag ESPC24. Don't forget to check out the Learning Hub, which is updated daily with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. You can access and view the Learning Hub by visiting our website, sharepointeurope.com, and clicking the Content tab at the top. Don't let the learning stop here. Continue to keep up and stay ahead by joining us for our next webinar, Introduction to Microsoft Fabric with Mohammed Adnan. This webinar is the fourth webinar of Microsoft Fabric Week and takes place tomorrow, Wednesday, the 21st of February from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. CET. For more information on this webinar, please check out sharepointeurope.com/Microsoft Fabric Week. So the moment we have all been waiting for is finally here. You can now view the European Power Platform Conference 2024 programme. Get ready for an immersive experience, hot topics and trends, world-class speakers, interactive panels, engaging tutorials, networking extravaganza, and much more. View the fantastic lineup of tutorials, sessions, and networking by visiting sharepointeurope.com/conference schedule 2024. Here at ESPC, we want to spread the love this Valentine's. That is why we are offering you this limited edition one-time offer, a deal we know you'll fall in love with. Why not infuse a little love into your workday by securing 30% off your ESPC 24 ticket? 2024 is the year to rekindle the flames of your Microsoft 365 passions and inspirations. Discover innovative solutions and time-saving techniques, meet with peers to share and receive ideas, hear the latest news from Microsoft Corporate, and of course, gain genius insight from our knowledgeable speakers. And again, you can visit sharepointeurope.com/pricing to snatch up this offer while it's still available. So John is here to answer all of your questions on all things Microsoft Fabric. So please do ensure you ask whatever questions you might have. And yeah, we'll jump straight into the questions now. So if you want to take it away there, John.
Well, thanks very much, Laura. I really appreciate it. And I do want to underscore, we'll need your questions, because without your questions, it's going to be a pretty dry next few minutes. I don't know if she's oversold it a little. I'm going to try to answer everything. I can't guarantee I'm going to answer everything to everyone's satisfaction, but I'll be happy to give it a shot. There's the Q&A session. I think people can, with a small enough group, we could probably do coming off mute, etc. as well. But we'll play that by ear. But I'd love to hear if anybody's got any burning question. We got one right off the bat. I think this was submitted, so we got there's a couple we can kick off. So maybe that will. Maybe that will spur some of you to have some questions of your own. I should probably, I guess, introduce myself a little bit. My name's John White, as you probably know already. I'm basically a data architect. I was the CTO and co-founder of tyGraph. tyGraph was acquired a year and a half ago by AvePoint, so we're now a big part of AvePoint. I've been a Microsoft Office Apps and Services is what it is these days. But to get started, it was a SharePoint MVP for a very long time, since about 2010, I think is what it was. And then a data platform MVP for about the last 5 years. Always focused on business intelligence, first within SharePoint, then as with Power BI, and now, of course, for the last year, big focus on Fabric generally. I'm coming to you, oddly enough, from Hawaii. I got here yesterday, so it's a little early for me. So as you folks are finishing your day, I'm just kind of beginning it. Time zone's not a problem because I just came from North America, so I'm kind of doing well on that standpoint. But with that underway, I'll have a look. There's in the Q&A we got a couple of questions. One of them, the first one. What are going to be an organization's biggest barriers to enabling Fabric? And how would you address their concerns about opening up data channels across the organization? That's a good question. With Fabric, at the very least, so one of the things, I'll start with what Fabric takes away from a barrier to adopting a data culture across the organization. And it takes away a lot, not all, of course, but a lot of the technical barriers. I think we're left basically with business barriers, which we have with the adoption of any technology. With smaller organizations, cost could be a barrier. If you are coming at Fabric from the Power BI world, you'll be familiar with the premium pricing within Power BI. That is exactly the same pricing model that Fabric adopted. The only difference between Power BI licensing overall and Fabric overall is the Fabric assets, all of the Fabric assets require that premium pricing. So the organization has to buy capacity. You don't have to license users individually with Fabric. You do for the Power BI workload within it, but you do have to purchase capacity. So that's basically an Azure spend. So there's a cost concern there. Another concern, and a big one, and you'll see this with, you hear all the conversation around Copilot these days. Well, Copilot is exposing data. So data needs to be in decent shape, first of all, to get results. But you risk, when you're exposing data to users, you need to make sure your security is nailed down. And you need to make it, well, so I'll back that up. Because Fabric has the potential to expose deficiencies in the security around your data. If you haven't locked things down properly, you may be getting away with it with the concept of security through obscurity. People may not know that it's there, and that's why they haven't accessed it. So you need to get that nailed down. So there's going to be resistance, or there potentially is going to be resistance from the business, from IT, to exposing data, because with Fabric, data is much simpler to access. How would I address some of these concerns from a cost standpoint? It doesn't take too long to see where Fabric is worth the spend in a lot of cases. From a security standpoint, controls are there. It's running in Azure in the Microsoft stack. You just have to do the work to ensure yourself that things are secured properly in general, but the tools are available to help address those concerns. So hopefully I've answered that one. We've got another one that says, how does Fabric differ from Azure Data Factory and Azure Synapse pipelines? That's another good question. And Azure Synapse pipelines are a part of Azure Data Factory. Azure Data Factory was simply an Azure service. And then it became part of the Synapse umbrella. So if you had Synapse was a kind of Microsoft's first attempt to bring a number of analytics tools under a single umbrella, UI umbrella. So really, a Synapse pipeline is the same as a Data Factory pipeline. It really was the same. How you accessed it, or how you approached it, was just different from a UI standpoint. Now, what is Fabric, or what is Fabric at the end of the day? Microsoft was going to build a Synapse version 3. That is what Fabric is today. It basically morphed into what Fabric is today. So they've changed a number of architectural things behind the scenes, but they've totally changed the UI and the way all of these workloads access data. And they've brought a number of other things into it, including, of course, Power BI, including Azure Data Explorer, otherwise known as Kusto. It shows up in Fabric today as KQL databases. It's also brought in Azure Event Hubs. So Fabric has essentially subsumed. It's taken on all of Synapse, everything that was in Synapse, everything that was in Power BI, everything that was in Azure Data Explorer, and a number of other things, and brought it under a single umbrella from a UI standpoint, from a charging standpoint, and from a data storage standpoint with one lake. So to answer that question, hopefully succinctly, Azure Fabric includes the pipelines. Pipeline is an artifact in Fabric, and it includes everything available in Azure Data Factory. It's kind of the next version of Azure Data Factory. Not those things still do exist independently within Azure and within Synapse, but Fabric is kind of the next version of it. Next question we've got from Anonymous. Why choose Fabric Data Factory over ADF Synapse pipelines? Well, that's not something you'll at least today. There may be cases where you wouldn't want to do that because there are still some capabilities that are available through the ADF and Synapse pipelines that Fabric won't do. It's slightly early days, but most of them are there. So why would you want to choose the Fabric Data Factory? Because it's basically the value proposition of Fabric overall. It's easy to access for one. So again, if you've used Power BI before, you're familiar with the workspace model. So everything lives within a workspace security boundary, and then you can add artifacts to it. One of those artifacts you can add to it is a pipeline. So it's much more approachable, and it's much easier to connect these things to lake houses, which is that common data thread that goes throughout Fabric. But you can of course connect to all of your other favorite data sources and bring them in. But it's that unified layer that's easy to connect to things is one reason. Another one is that single charging model. So today, if you wanted to go create an Azure Data Factory pipeline, you're going to have to go stand up an Azure Data Factory service in Azure and maintain that and maintain that security all by yourself, or as an independent entity is what I mean to say. With Fabric, but just by adding the pipeline to the workspace, you kind of get all of that stuff. I'm not going to say for free, but you get that as part of the charge when it comes to costing. The charge for it, the spend is just all you're doing is consuming Fabric capacity. So when I said earlier that you buy Fabric capacity, you basically have a certain amount, call them CUs. You have a certain number of CUs, and you use that up over time. And then when you run a pipeline in Fabric, you're just consuming those CUs, as opposed to having a separate line item charge on your bill. So a lot of this stuff, it's kind of businessy, and it's ease of use. Functionally, it's almost at full parity with Azure Data Factory, what you get today in Azure Data Factory. I think there's a few things that are still unavailable in Fabric pipelines that you can get in Azure Data Factory. But I would say if you have Fabric, or if you're considering Fabric, you would pick a Fabric pipeline any day over an Azure Data Factory pipeline, unless you got a reason not to. What is the data engineering tab in Fabric, and how best to use? To answer that question, I have to back it up a little bit and talk about the various persona tabs in Fabric, which is what the data engineering tab is. It's the data engineering persona. When you're in Fabric, you are part of a persona. And so again, if you're coming from the Power BI world, you'll be in the Power BI persona by default. You can switch personas in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. What does that do? Not a whole lot. It changes what the home page experience is for Fabric for you. So if you're a Power BI user, you're going to see quick creates for a data set and a report and all of those sorts of things. If you're in data engineering, you're going to see quick creates for a lake house. I believe, I don't remember what they all are off the top of my head, but basically assets that are available to that, or but that Microsoft thinks that persona will be very interested in. Also, it changes what, in the new button in the UI, you'll see your assets, the assets that pertain to that particular persona, and then there will be a more button where you can go and access everything across Fabric, so outside of that particular persona. So that's really all that the persona is. It's just a way of organizing the UI. It doesn't really have any functional differentiation. It's just a way to keep people comfortable and to basically be able to do UI designs that are specific to those various personas. There's other personas in there. There's the data science persona. There's the real-time data persona, which includes the KQL stuff, et cetera, that I was talking about. All right, let's come back to the next one. So again, we've got another question. Is there any limit to the volume of data that Microsoft Fabric can process? Nope. That's very simple. From a storage standpoint, the backend, the one lake really is limitless. And even if there was a limit to something you could store in, say, Azure, you can use shortcuts to link data in from other sources like AWS. For example, you can link in Dataverse, all kinds of things. So that in terms from a storage standpoint, there's no limit to the processing. Because the question does say how to the limit of data that Microsoft Fabric can process. The question would be how quickly. And that gets to scale. And how do you, when it all comes back to licensing at the end of the day, right? You can purchase Fabric in a capacity. And unlike Power BI's Premium, which started at what was called a P1, it had a certain number of processes, and that came in at about $5,000 US a month. You can get into what's called an F2 in Fabric, and that comes in at just under $200 US a month. Now it's a lot. It has a lot fewer resources than that equivalent P1 from Power BI. The P1, by the way, is the same thing as a Fabric F64. So let's talk in the Fs. So that F64 is what we would have been familiar with before. And that's really just, it's what you're getting is a number of resources that can execute things in behind the scenes, how quickly things can get done. So you can start small, and you can scale up to what is an F2048. That gets pretty expensive. I don't remember what the number is, but I think it's somewhere around $250,000 a month. So it gets huge. So the only real limit is the constraint on cost. So there's no technical limit. Would I recommend any online learning resources to help understand Fabric and Data Factory better? I don't. I get that question an awful lot, and I don't have hands-on stuff because I've kind of come up with this, so I've never walked through an awful lot of it. I will take this opportunity to make a shameless plug there's a Fabric conference in Las Vegas at the end of March. Myself and Jason Himmelstein will be giving a Fabric for the Power BI professional tutorial. It's an all-day tutorial, so if you want to come to Vegas and be part of that conference, we'd be happy to walk through a number of things. That's going to have the angle of for the Power BI person. So if you're used to Power BI, how would I use Fabric? There are also, I think it's called Fabric in a Day. There used to be a dashboard in a day for Power BI. So this takes the same idea of walking through all of the various assets in Fabric. There's a number of those out in the community. Online stuff. There are Microsoft Learn. I have gone through a number of things in preparation for that tutorial. I went through a Microsoft Learn learning path on a number of these assets, and I found that quite good. And in product, I don't remember where in the UI, but in product, there's a number of resources to help you learn too. So there's a number of assets, quite a few really, for given this point in the product cycle. Hopefully that answers the question. How does Microsoft Fabric support different roles and persona in the data analytics process? I think I might have addressed that question before when we talked about the persona switchers. So someone who's interested in data science per se is going to be interested in working with notebooks and different languages and experiments, etc. If you choose the data science persona, all of those assets are going to be right at your beck and call, right in your face. One of the things I will say, I mean, if you're used to working in that world and notebooks, et cetera, a lot of the work has traditionally been wiring up those notebooks to the data sources. While Fabric, again, as I mentioned, makes that very easy. The default data source for any of these notebooks is just the lakehouse. So getting that data into your lakehouse one way or another. It's a snap. You just connect your notebook to your Lakehouse, and you can implicitly connect any of the data in behind. You don't have to set up connection strings and permissioning or any of that stuff at all. So it makes it a lot easier in that way. But in terms of the different roles and personas, they were basically isolating the different assets that are available to you in Fabric in just different UIs. It's really a UI consideration. All right. I should pop over to the chat at some point in time just to see if anybody. Okay, we've just got some instructions. So all right, I'm just wandering along here. And we've got a question here. Given the SQL endpoint, at least for data warehousing, is available in Fabric, a question arises. Is there any plan for Fabric to also become an alternative for Azure SQL? That way, both production data and analytical data for an enterprise would be on the same platform. I understand that depends on technical capabilities of Delta tables in the first place. Wow. All right. We've got 10 minutes left, and I'll try to answer that in that time. It's an excellent question. So first of all, I'm going to explain the SQL endpoint for everyone here. As you mentioned, it's available in data warehousing. That makes sense, right? Because data warehousing is based on SQL technology. It's natural that you'd be using a SQL endpoint to access the data within it. The interesting thing with Fabric for data warehouse is that now your data isn't stored in proprietary SQL databases, right, in behind the scenes anymore. It's stored, well, depending on how you set it up before, it wasn't necessarily either, but now it's going to be stored in the Lakehouse. Sorry, I should really say it's going to be stored in OneLake. A Lakehouse is one implementation of OneLake. But it's going to be stored in OneLake, and your data is stored in Delta format. I want to get some of these concepts out. So what is Delta? Delta is a way of storing text-based data. So think CSV. It's not CSV. I just want to be very clear about that. But think about using a CSV file as a data source. Why would you want to do that? What's human readable? That's one. So let's take that one off there. That's not really our consideration. Bottom line here is it's cheap. I can put that in a blob store in Azure and not pay a whole lot of money, the same kind of money I would for having transactional data storage in something like Azure SQL, which is again part of this question. So if I can do that, if I can store it there, why wouldn't I do that? Well, performance is the problem, because those types of those file-based data sources don't necessarily perform really well transactionally. I can't just go and do massive queries against that and expect to get good results. Well, that's not so true anymore. So if my format is this format called Parquet, don't worry about the details, but it's a very, very efficient way of storing data in a file-based container. And I can apply this technology called Delta to it, which is a way of bringing transactional atomic data to file-based storage. I kind of get the best of both worlds, and if we do it right, we can get transactional SQL level performance out of file-based storage. So why would I do that? Because I'm getting the performance I need at the cost I want. And that's the basis of Fabric. I mentioned OneLake before, and these lake houses that are built on OneLake. The native storage format, it's not the only storage format, but when you write something out with Fabric, it's going to be stored in Delta. If it can, it'll store it in Delta Parquet format under the hood. And that is what Data Warehouse is doing. It's also, when I talk about a lake house, that's also how the Lakehouse wants to store its transactional data. You have the option of not doing that, but then you don't get that Delta storage and that super fast technology, but it's more flexible. So you have that option as well. And there is, by the way, a SQL endpoint there. So if you've got transactional data and it's in Parquet, Delta Parquet format is what they're calling it, you have a SQL endpoint for the data in a Lakehouse as well as just a data warehouse. And in some cases, that's faster, believe it or not. So then to get to the nut of your question, is there any plan for Fabric to also become an alternative for Azure SQL? Something that has been announced. It is not in the product yet. It is in private preview today, is mirroring. And mirroring is and this is how Custo, Azure Data Explorer data works today in Fabric. It's, as it came up through the world, it has its own super efficient storage mechanism. And frankly, Delta isn't there today to be native. It is going to be there for that technology. So what KQL databases do, or Custo databases, are they mirror out the data to OneLake as that data is updated. So as you add data to a KQL database, that data is reflected back in your OneLake, and you can work with it in Delta Parquet format. That's coming for other databases. And one of the ones that is in private preview today is Azure SQL. So today, at the very least, we're not looking at replacing or having an Azure SQL database as an asset specifically in Fabric, but the representation of an Azure SQL database will be available in Fabric so that you can see everything that's happening on that transactional database in Fabric as it's happening. And you can do all of those wonderful things with the data that's behind the scenes. It's in OneLake, like build a Power BI report on top of it that doesn't require refreshing. So hopefully that answers the question. I know it was rather long-winded. I did it in 5, so I think I'm doing all right with that. Considering the history of ADF, do we need to wait for Fabric 2? I'd say no, personally. I can't make that decision for you. But I wouldn't look at it being Fabric 2. I would look at that as being ADF 3, or as ADF 3, or whatever the version, the next version of ADF is. Fabric, again, is a consolidation of pre-existing technologies under a single umbrella. So, there are some things about Fabric that are very new, obviously, but for the most part, it's the logical maturation of those very technologies. All right, how does Microsoft Fabric integrate with other Microsoft products? Is Microsoft Fabric a must-have for organizations now? I always hesitate to say it's a must-have. You must have it. If you've got analytics needs and you're starting out, especially if you're starting out today, if you've got any kind of analytics needs, or really if you want to make it easier to approach your data, I'd certainly say Fabric is something you'd really want to have a good look at. If you look at your data, here's another way to put it. If you see your data as one of your core assets, Fabric helps you unlock the value of those assets. That's really what I say. And I do not work for Microsoft. And if you haven't figured it out, I am completely thrilled with what Microsoft has done with Fabric. And just to back that up a little bit, I mean, in my long career, I've often complained that the various teams at Microsoft don't talk to each other well enough. Things don't integrate well enough together, and that Microsoft ships their org structure, which is true. Fabric is no different, right? Fabric is what is, because a few years ago, all of the data assets within Azure were put together under a single engineering structure. By the way, that includes Power BI. Power BI on the engineering side is part of that data team, not part of the Power Platform team. Power Platform is a marketing thing. So by bringing all that stuff together, now all of that stuff integrates well together. All of the data assets within Microsoft integrate super well together. I mentioned Dataverse before. You can use Dataverse as a shortcut. So because that's, again, different team, right? Business apps. So that's a different storage system, but you can shortcut into it and have it look like it's a element in your lakehouse. So how does it integrate with other Microsoft products? So it depends on the product, but for the most part, quite well. Certainly when we talk about data assets, it's one of the big pluses of Fabric, is it makes it easier to access your data. Another question, do I need a good understanding of Azure AI to be able to use Microsoft Fabric? And the answer, I can 100% conclusively say, is no, because I don't have a good understanding of Azure AI. I mean, I can speak to it. I've got a little tiny bit of experience with it, but I would not call myself as being anything near an expert in Azure AI. If you're an AI person, if you're a data scientist, you're going to be able to make good use of Fabric. But the place I live is I'm dealing with the data itself, making sure the data is in good shape, is processed, is reliable, up to date, et cetera. And that is a foundational That's a foundational position for AI. To have decent AI, it has to be trained on decent data. Is Power BI leaving the Power Platform family and now just within Microsoft Fabric? If you listen to the podcast I do with Jason Himmelstein, you'll see I've predicted that for the last 2 years and been wrong. No, it's not. It exists in the market, in the marketing as part of the Power Platform. I am not aware of any changes to that at all. But engineering wise, it's part of that same team that does Fabric. But Power BI is still available on its own. You don't have to have Fabric to have Power BI. That still exists, and I'm reasonably certain that that won't change. There's a reason to have it that on its own in the market. But Power BI is the foundation for everything Fabric. If you go and look at the UI, if you look at the way the billing models work, et cetera, Power BI is tightly integrated. So it's easy to basically flip all of the other Fabric. If you're a Power BI person, Fabric just looks like a whole bunch of new premium features. And that's how it's turned. Basically, you go into your administration console and you turn Fabric on, and then apply the license, and away you go. That's it. So I don't think it's leaving the Power Platform family, at least not in the immediate future. I think over time that probably will happen, but that's just me. And I think we're at the top of the hour, and I think we're out of questions. So, Laura, I'll just confirm that with you. I think we're just going to the top of the hour, right?
Yeah, that seems to be all the questions we have. So right on the button, finished up just on time, which is fantastic. So again, John, I just want to extend a big thank you to yourself for taking the time to come on here and answer all those fantastic questions. And
Yeah,
thanks
they
to
were.
everyone for joining us and asking some really, really good questions. So that is all for today, folks. And I hope that you'll join us again soon.
Thanks a bunch, everybody. Hope I wasn't too much of a fire hose there.
Thanks again, guys. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.